Hi, I'm Dean.
And I'm Jones. This record was recorded on the 21st of April, 1985, and we've been in the recording studio for 5 or 6 hours remixing it, and it's about time we went on the air.
So on behalf of Marty, Dane, Mike, and Kevin, thanks to everybody for being on the record. Have a great summer.
If you thought you were in Bizarro World or something, well, I don't blame you, because it is now time to join me in my odd world of strange, miscellaneous, and otherwise uncategorizable media for your turntable. My name is Sean, coming to you from Chicago, and I welcome you to episode 20 of my weird record collection. In this episode, we're going to revisit the summer of 1985 with the charity album Will They Know It's Summertime? Or unless you are too young to have visited 1985 in the first place, then you're going to visit 1985. But before I get into that, first thing I want to do is talk about part 4 of my saga of the album called The Makaha Sessions. Just to catch you up, it was released on Record Store Day in April of this year, but unfortunately only enough copies were made to satisfy the demands of 75% of Record Store Day record stores. None of the record stores around me had it, but a friend of mine in another state happened to find it when he went Record Store Day shopping. So he picked up a copy for me, sent it my way, and while the record was actually literally on its way to being delivered to my house, the post office decided that it was undeliverable because my mailbox did not have my name on it, so they returned it to sender. Problem, number 1, my mailbox does have my name, and number 2, records will never go in my mailbox. They will be left in the foyer, along with any other package, which is what's been happening in the past almost 19 years I've lived here. So the record gets sent back to the original sender, my friend over in another state. Problem is, when it got to his metropolitan area, suddenly no progress was made, and essentially the mail was lost. I filed a report on it and followed up as they recommended with a letter to the consumer advocate, who wrote back saying, "We got your report. Just keep an eye on that tracking number and we'll get back to you as soon as we can." Now, since episode 19, my friend in the other state has filed his own missing item report, as he was recommended to do. So we're still waiting on what's going to happen with that. The problem is, it's been a really hot summer so far, both in my state and in his state, which is, we're just really one state away. So I have a feeling that even if they were to find that record, it's probably very, very warped at this point. I have a record pie that I could try to flatten it with, but we'll see if anything ever happens. And of course, if there is a part 5, I will update you on that in episode 21 or whatever episode there is an update for. Also, I want to share some feedback I got from a couple of listeners regarding the previous episode, in which I talked about A Great Way to Live, A Tragic Way to Die by Earl Nightingale. Longtime listener David, well, long time in that this podcast isn't really all that old, it's just a year and a half old. He says, and I quote, "Holy moly, this guy is not someone you would invite to a party. He's the proto Debbie Downer. He's the guy you hide in the closet until you want the party to end and you unleash him on the other guests." After I got that, I asked for more feedback, and I did hear from another listener, Chris, who says, "Thanks for doing so much research on Earl Nightingale. I found the story of his life pretty damn inspiring. The Great Way to Live album may well have never been available in a retail capacity." I never really thought of this. He brings up a good point. He says, the album may never have been available in a retail capacity, which could be why you didn't find much information on it. Judging from the sticker in the upper right corner of each cover, the LP was presumably sold directly to companies as part of some kind of safe driving program, perhaps to be presented at a safety meeting or during an orientation. I imagine that the companies in question involved driving in one way or another, But since this is all conjecture anyway, that's just another bit of it. And by the way, when I posted the episode, in the episode description, I talked about how my theory was that on his way to work or something, he had a bad day in traffic. Well, here's what Chris had to say about that. He said, "I think you're quite right. Earl had a bad day in traffic, realized, hey, wait, I have a record company when he reached his destination, and wrote out his script with the frustration still fresh from his rough time among inconsiderate drivers. He certainly has a flair for graphic language. He really wants the listener to be horrified out of driving carelessly, so he invents exorbitant statistics, pardon me, Earl, humans, and makes gory accidents sound almost lyrical. Smashed and broken and banged and lacerated to death could easily have been an early Metallica lyric. Earl also clearly has an immaturity phobia. You really put some time into that mature montage. It's quite a work of art." I'll drop it in here for those of you who want to hear it again.
Act like a good driver. Mature, cool, courteous, attentive, deliberate, careful, and wise. The immature adult is a person who has grown up big on the outside and has remained a little child on the inside. Mature, unsound, and immature judgment. Unsound and immature judgment. If you're immature, remain a passenger if you possibly can. Putting an immature person behind the wheel of a car is like giving a box of matches to a child in a fireworks factory. Immaturity is one of the biggest headaches of man. Immaturity, of course, means we haven't grown up yet, haven't matured mentally and emotionally.
Old Earl would have an aneurysm these days, considering the number of dummies sending or reading text messages while trying to control tons of steel on wheels. With a couple of phone-related additions, this whole LP would be just as applicable these days as it was in 1958 or 68. So yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for sharing that. And by the way, I think I know why a lot of sources cited 1967 as the release date of at least the version that I have. And it turns out that the 1967 date does appear somewhere in the album, I think, on the label. I think in one place the copyright date is 1967 and in another place the date is 1968. It's just that when I recorded the episode, I had not yet seen the 1967 date on it. So I don't know. But whatever the case, that's enough about Earl Nightingale. Let's move on to today's topic, a music album called Will They Know It's Summertime? The credited group, Sand Aid. Will They Know It's Summertime is the product of a San Diego radio station called 91X. The call sign was XETRA-FM. But wait a minute, Sean, I hear you all say collectively. I thought radio stations west of the Mississippi River start with the letter K. That is true for American radio stations that are not military owned. 91X, although generally regarded as a San Diego station, is actually located over the Mexico border in Tijuana. XETRA was at first an AM station that is now known as XEWW, but in 1968, the station's parent company received a license to broadcast a 3,000-watt signal on the FM band from its existing tower in Playas de Rosario. In 1978, Noble Broadcast Group of San Diego bought the station's programming and sales rights, changed the format to album-oriented rock, or AOR, moved the station's frequency a bit down the dial from 91.3 to 91.1 megahertz, and relocated the broadcast tower to Mount San Antonio, where it remains to this day. At first, the programming was actually recorded in downtown San Diego in a studio located in the Harcourt Brace and Jovanovich building, and the recordings would then be shuttled to the transmitter several times a day for playback on the air, but that proved to be a pain in the hiney. So eventually radio staff would actually commute from San Diego to Tijuana to do their shifts live. And apparently the broadcast studio was in a really bad neighborhood, but many of the workers found that the fact that it was in a bad neighborhood to be more exciting than frightening. And oftentimes during the commute, staff would actually bring food to hungry kids in that neighborhood. On January 11th, 1983, the station changed management and formats. Usually when management changes at a station, the format also changes. On that day, the 5 o'clock p.m. broadcast hour ended with Stairway to Heaven, and then the format switched to modern rock. From what I was able to gather, it doesn't look like any of the disc jockeys lost their jobs due to a format change, which is a rarity in radio. They were simply told, here's what you're going to be playing now. The first song that the station played in the new so-called Rock of the 80s format was Sex, I'm a... by Berlin. Now we're going to get back to 91X, which at this time is a 100,000 watt station, quite a step up from 3,000 watts. We're going to talk about them again in a bit, but for now, we need to talk about something that happened right around the time of 91X's format change.
In Ethiopia, 7 million people are threatened by starvation. Thousands have already died. The famine caused by drought is the worst in living memory, and now the rains have failed again for the third year in succession. The relief organisations are doing all they can, but there just isn't enough food to go around. One of the worst hit areas is in the north of the country, where the problem has been complicated by 2 secessionist wars in Eritrea and Tigray.
Ethiopia was no stranger to famines, but in 1983, numerous factors such as civil war and other political issues, the economy, soil degradation, and a drought led to a huge famine that affected 8 million people and killed 1 million before the end of 1984. A news report that October by the British Broadcasting Corporation raised awareness across England, leading many to donate money to charity for famine relief. One person who was particularly moved by the report was Bob Geldof of the Irish new wave band the Boomtown Rats. What did Bob do? Well, anybody listening of a certain age or older will know that he formed a musical supergroup called Band Aid, which consisted of dozens of primarily British pop stars, including members of the Boomtown Rats, Culture Club, U2, Bananarama, Spandau Ballet, Kool and the Gang, and a few others. And, of course, many people of a certain age will remember their song, Do They Know It's Christmas, which was released on December 7th, 1984. Bob Geldof promised that 100% of the sales of that record would be donated to Ethiopian famine relief efforts. Many retailers also agreed to sell the record at cost. When the song was starting to pick up traction, BBC Radio 1 played it every hour, which is quite a lot considering that the norm for most hit singles was maybe 7 or 8 spins a day. Do They Know It's Christmas shot up to the top of the charts in many countries. One notable exception, the United States, where due to a relative lack of airplay, the song only peaked at number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100. It's still not a bad showing, though. But it was the all-important Christmas #1 in the UK, where it stayed on top for 5 weeks. Within a week of its release, Do They Know It's Christmas sold 1 million copies, making it the fastest-selling single in UK chart history until Elton John's 1997 Princess Diana memorial remake of his song Candle in the Wind. Within a year of its release, Do They Know It's Christmas raised £8 million. By 1985, the song sold 2.5 million copies, and by the end of the decade, it sold nearly 12 million copies. By the way, folks, before you say, well, of course they don't know it's Christmas, they don't celebrate Christmas in those parts of Africa. Guess again. Africa is a huge continent, remember, consisting of many countries. And over 67% of Ethiopia practices Christianity. Now, due to the nature of the album put out by 91X, I need to talk about another major musical project done to raise money for Ethiopia.
We are the world. We are the children. We are the ones who make a better day. So let's start giving.
And that, of course, is USA for Africa, USA standing for United Supporting of Artists. USA for Africa was the brainchild of legendary calypso singer and activist Harry Belafonte, who shortly after the release of Do They Know It's Christmas commissioned Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie to write an equivalent song for the American market to raise money for famine relief. Quincy Jones, still riding high off the success of Michael Jackson's 1982 album Thriller, was enlisted to produce the song, a song that we all know as We Are the World. The backing track of We Are the World was recorded on January 22, 1985, at Lion's Share, which is the LA recording studio owned by Kenny Rogers. During that recording session, Lionel Richie and Michael Jackson provided guide vocals. Copies of that recording with the guide vocals were sent to the performers who would make up USA for Africa with a note saying not to share or copy the tape. The note also included this sentence, and I quote, "In the years to come, when your children ask, 'What did mommy and daddy do for the war against famine?' you can proudly say, 'This was your contribution.'" The vocal overdubs from USA for Africa would be laid down on January 28th, the night of the American Music Awards. In fact, many of the performers who made up the supergroup actually came to the studio straight from the AMA ceremony. Nearly 50 performers participated, and 50 more offered but were turned away, one of whom was John Denver, allegedly because someone involved in the project thought he was too square to be credible. One of the artists who was invited but didn't actually participate was Eddie Murphy. He had to decline because he was busy recording his own song, Party All the Time. Prince also declined for various reasons. I'm going to say that one of the big reasons was, well, because he's Prince. But I'm sorry to interject that there. But he did offer to record a guitar solo, but he was denied. So instead, he contributed a song for the album that USA for Africa would put out. But one curious inclusion among the USA for Africa singers was Dan Aykroyd. Many people thought, well, USA for Africa, well, Dan Aykroyd's Canadian and he's an actor. Well, number one, remember, USA did not mean United States of America. It meant United Supporting of Artists. And number two, yes, Aykroyd is a well-known Canadian, but the PR story at the time was that they wanted Hollywood film representation. But the real story as to why Dan Aykroyd was in the group was, well, he kind of fell backwards into it. Danny and his father were looking to hire a business manager, but they accidentally talked to a talent manager instead, and that talent manager invited Dan to participate. Dan's logic was, well, I did sell a few million records with the Blues Brothers, and in my other persona, I am a musician, so I guess it makes sense. But anyway, as the performers arrived in the studio, they were greeted by Stevie Wonder, who told them that if they did not nail the performance in one take, he and Ray Charles would be driving everybody home. Also greeting the performers was a sign that said, "Check your ego at the door." Performers who did participate besides Jackson, Aykroyd, Richie Ray, and Stevie included, among many others, most of the Jackson siblings, Paul Simon, Hall & Oates, Huey Lewis, Kenny Loggins, Bruce Springsteen, Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, who nearly walked out of the session, by the way, Diana Ross, Cyndi Lauper, and Bob Dylan, the latter of whom had to be coached by Stevie Wonder, who taught Bob Dylan how to sing like Bob Dylan. The sessions were filmed, and those films spawned not only a music video, but also at least 2 documentaries. We Are the World was released as a single on March 7th, 1985, and the album followed on the 1st of April. The single raised over $80 million for famine relief. And I can tell you from my own memory, folks, that song was ubiquitous at the time. It was on the radio seemingly nonstop. The video was in constant rotation on any channel that showed music videos. And in fact, I remember being at Showbiz Pizza Place once as a 10-year-old, and between performances by the Rock-afire Explosion, a screen lowered from the ceiling, and the We Are the World video was projected on it. And by the way, that video helped nip a rumor in the bud that Michael Jackson and Diana Ross were really the same person. Well, how did the video nip that rumor in the bud before it got widespread? It showed the two of them holding hands. In 1985, no video post-production was good enough to fake that. The ubiquity of the song certainly was not harmed when Georgia radio jocks Don Brisker and Bob Wolf organized a worldwide simulcast of the song in which over 8,000 radio stations around the world played the song at 3:50 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time on Good Friday, which was April 5th, 1985. There was another simulcast with over 6,000 stations on Good Friday the following year, March 28th. We Are the World peaked at number 1 just about everywhere on Earth, except for a few countries where it reached a high of number 2, and in Denmark, where the single absolutely flopped. It only reached number 3. Worldwide, the song has sold over 14 million copies. The album wasn't quite as successful, but it still cracked the top 10 on most album charts, except in the UK, where it only reached number 31, but it did hit the top spot on the Billboard 200 within 2 weeks of its release, something that only the Beatles and the Stones could ever do before then. The album sold about 4 million copies worldwide and was certified triple platinum in the United States by the Recording Industry Association of America. And by the way, if you've listened to this podcast frequently enough, you know how I am. When I see claims about something being certified gold or platinum, I have to check for myself. Well, turns out this time, the information is totally accurate. We Are the World, as an album, was certified triple platinum on June 24th, 1985. That was fast. And the single was certified quadruple platinum on April 1st, 1985, and that's the very same day that the album went gold. So there we go. We finally have some accurate gold and platinum information. Of course, there were other fundraising efforts for Ethiopian famine relief, such as Live Aid and Comic Relief. But the reason I focused on just the two that I focused on was that, well, they're most definitely the reason that we have the record that is the feature of this month's episode of My Weird Record Collection. So let's talk about Will They Know It's Summertime? While all this was going on, in San Diego, 91X morning zookeepers Dean Opperman and Brian Jones, who hosted a show called The Breakfast Club, were inspired by the worldwide simulcast of We Are the World. Could they do something similar to We Are the World and Do They Know It's Christmas to represent San Diego? The idea was to organize as many local celebrities, musicians especially, and record music to raise money for famine relief in Africa. The name of this West Coast supergroup would be Sand Aid. That's all capital letters with a period between Sand and Aid. That was apparently an abbreviation for San Diego Aid for Africa. Sand Aid's logo was designed in imitation of USA for Africa's logo, with Sand Aid in big blue capital letters with a couple of symbols in them, one of them being a palm tree. And right below it in red script is the phrase San Diego Aid for Africa. The celebrities gathered for the album included Mojo Nixon and Skid Roper, the Beat Farmers, then Mayor Roger Hedgecock, then Police Chief Bill Colander, San Diego Padres first baseman Steve Garvey, and even San Diego resident Lawrence Welk, plus a handful of local San Diego bands. The centerpiece of the album is its title track, which is actually Do They Know It's Christmas, but with different lyrics written by Opperman and Jones, with the blessings of both Bob Geldof and Midge Ure, the song's original composers. In fact, Midge Ure actually contributed a spoken message that was included on the new version of the songs.
Hi, this is Midge Ure from Ultravox and co-writer of the Band Aid record. Part of the record you're listening to just now. I've just come back from Africa and I've seen the good that we're all doing. Keep up the good work and we need every penny. Thank you.
Speaking of which, there are several messages by the participants, so many that the song lasts for over 11 minutes.
Hi, this is John Lynch, General Manager of 91X. I'd like to encourage all of San Diego to help feed the hungry world.
A couple of the messages include verbiage about how instead of spending money on concert tickets, you should consider donating that money to famine relief instead. I can only think of those musicians who are relying on concert ticket revenue to make a living, but hey, there were more important priorities here. Was Will They Know It's Summertime riding the coattails of Band-Aid and USA for Africa? Absolutely. Did Brian Jones and Dean Opperman think so? Absolutely. In fact, they reasoned that riding the coattails would be a good way to raise a lot of money fast. Also, as part of Sand-Aid's relief efforts, 91X held a radiothon on April 26, 1985, in conjunction with San Diego nonprofit Project Concern. That radiothon lasted for 53 hours, and during those 53 hours, the station auctioned off some rock memorabilia and a few other items, and they took pledges for donations. During that weekend, the station took in over $111,000, 20% of which went directly to African famine relief, and the rest went to programs run by Project Concern. Now, let me jump into how I discovered this record. My wife Lisa and I, we go to San Diego a lot, at least once a year, and we stay in Ocean Beach, or OB as they call it. And in OB, right by our hotel, there's a small used record store called Cow Records. One day in December 2021, when we were there for Lisa's birthday, we were in Cow Records and we spotted this album in the oddities section. And we thought it was just weird, kind of a bizarro hybrid of We Are the World and Do They Know It's Christmas. I figured for $5.98, it'd be an interesting purchase. I understand, folks, that this is an audio podcast, except for those of you who partake in the podcast via YouTube. So I should describe what the album looks like. Well, the front cover is clearly a knockoff of the We Are the World album, but with kind of a sandy grayish background instead of the reddish background. But other than that, the design, the layout, the font patterns, they're all exactly the same as on the We Are the World album. On the top of the front cover, it says, San Diego's historic recording, Will They Know It's Summertime? Plus 8 new superstar songs. Then below that is a big picture of just about everybody who participated in Sand-Aid with what looks like a hastily designed white Sand-Aid sign behind them. And there are a few participants wearing Sand-Aid shirts. Under the picture is an alphabetical list of all the participants, and there are a lot. If you're not a Gen Xer from the San Diego area, chances are you haven't heard of most of the people in the credits, but there are a few familiar names. Again, Steve Garvey, Country Dick Montana from the Beat Farmers, Mojo Nixon, Lawrence Welk. Under the list of participants is this credit. Written and produced by Dean Opperman and Brian Jones, arranged and conducted by Marty Eldridge and Dane Conover. And then at the bottom, there's the Sand-Aid logo. The back cover has a lot of technical details. In the middle of the back cover is the track listing, which is as follows. Will They Know It's Summertime by Sand-Aid. This time, Sand-Aid is actually spelled in title case instead of all caps, but still with the period between the two words. Then there's Stones Against the Rain by the Monroes.
And here we stand alone, like stones against the rain.
Dream of Many by Number One and the Best Boys, featuring Vivian Jenkins on vocal.
I could think of something else again. Something in the wind that's blowing by me now.
Man in the Shoe by the Seventh.
I feel like a man who's been living inside a shoe.
By the way, Discogs.com lists at least 4 bands with the name The Seventh. The one on this record is The Seventh, number 4. And side 2 kicks off with Lock the Snack Bar by Bobby Valare, which is an alter ego of Dean Opperman.
Old milk duds were a sticking there to his radiator grill. But he don't like it, no. Lock up the snack bar, lock the snack bar.
From what I gather, Bobby Valare is a character that Dean Opperman came up with who's basically, I don't know, I might be overthinking this, but basically kind of like an obnoxious, loungy kind of singer. But the song on the record is a parody, obviously, of Rock the Casbah by The Clash. And in fact, The Clash actually plays on the track, which makes me wonder if Opperman might have gotten the actual backing track of Rock the Casbah, or maybe he just sampled the song and looped it where necessary. But whatever the case, all the members of The Clash are credited with their respective instruments. And in fact, Every track on the album lists who played which instrument and sang on each of the tracks. Lock the Snack Bar, by the way, kind of goes against that little subtitle about 8 new superstar songs, because by the time this album came out, Lock the Snack Bar was already about 3 years old, because it was on the Bobby Valare album called Out to Lunch. And on that album, it lists the performer of Lock the Snack Bar as Bobby Valare and the Raisinets. Anyway, folks, the next song is called Company by Marty Eldridge. Then we have Across the Nations by Glory House. Feel Like I Do by Tamara Colby. And Death Row Blues by Mojo Nixon. And you might be wondering, wait, what about Skid Roper? Well, even though the song is only credited to Mojo, Skid Roper is credited as playing, and I quote, washboard skid stick. Above the track listing, there is a strip of what I am guessing are publicity photos of each of the acts on the album, starting with the Monroes and ending with Mojo Nixon and Skid Roper. Crazy thing is that all the pictures in this strip look very familiar, even though I've never seen them outside this album. It just shows you how much everything looked the same, so uniform, back in the mid-'80s. But below the track listing, there are a lot of credits. Executive producer John Lynch, he was the general manager of 91X at the time. Album supervisor Dean Opperman, etc. I'm not going to go through all the credits, or else this episode will be like 4 hours long. There's a long list of people and organizations under the heading of "We couldn't have done this without the help and inspiration of." Among the many, many names, as you would expect, are Band-Aid, USA for Africa, Bob Geldof, and Midge Ure. Over to the left of that, there's the Feed the World logo that you can see on the Do They Know It's Christmas picture sleeve. The 91X logo is on the right side, and it's in yellow. The album cover is a gatefold, and when you open it up, you'll find that it's chock full of pictures of what I believe was the recording session, but there are absolutely no captions on any of the pictures. Among the pictures is what is obviously a publicity picture of Lawrence Welk. He provided a voiceover for the title track, but I doubt he was actually in the room with the rest of Band-Aid. In fact, I don't think he's even on the front cover. And by the way, there's a part in the song Will They Know It's Summertime in which female singers, I believe Vivian Jenkins, Tamara Colby, and Joyce Rooks, they sing to the tune of the Feed the World refrain from Do They Know It's Christmas? They sing the names of San Diego's neighborhoods and some nearby towns, responding with "We can help to feed the world" after each one of them. Now, the reason I'm calling this part of the song out specifically is that among all the pictures in the gatefold, there's a photo of a bunch of 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper on the floor with those neighborhoods and towns written in Sharpie on them. I'm guessing that Marty Eldridge or somebody else directing the recording held up each of those sheets of paper to cue the singers as to what they were singing. But anyway, down the left margin of the gatefold and continuing over to the right margin, there are liner notes written by Thomas K. Arnold, who was a San Diego music writer at the time and still is. After that, you have the lyrics to Will They Know It's Summertime. And upon looking at those printed lyrics, it seems as though with the first verse, at least, it looks like what Brian Jones and Dean Opperman did was basically wipe out some of the original Band-Aid lyrics that had to do specifically with Christmas and drop in alternate lyrics, almost like Mad Libs, just to fit summer instead of Christmas. Now, I gotta say, this is episode 20 of the podcast, and it took me until now to think of looking at the spine of the album cover as I describe the records, but this time I just had a hunch that I should. Well, it turns out There's nothing printed on the spine. So if you store the record spine out like most people would if the records are, say, on a shelf in a bookcase or in one of those IKEA Calyx units, you wouldn't know what the album is unless you happen to know it has a blank spine. The actual record itself is very no frills, as are most of the records I talk about in this podcast, actually. It's a standard black vinyl 12-incher of standard weight, and it's inside a standard paper sleeve with a hole cut out for the label. The label is yellow, and it has the 91X logo above the spindle hole, and the Feed the World logo surrounds the spindle hole. Below the Feed the World logo, there's the track listing. It's very basic, just the names of the songs in all capital sans serif letters, and that's it. No artists are mentioned, just the names of the songs and the track numbers. And below that is a large number 1 on side 1 and a large number 2 on side 2. But since that record was made, what has happened to the 91X Breakfast Club morning crew? Well, Dean Opperman left the station that October in the wake of absences that may have been related to a drug problem. Brian Jones, by the way, if I didn't mention it already, his name is spelled Bryan, but Brian Jones also had his own drug problems. They were so bad that his BMW was actually repossessed at some point, and he found himself having a hard time driving to Tijuana at 5:30 in the morning and was often a no-show. And when he did make it to the station, his behavior was becoming erratic. Management wanted him to take a drug test, but he knew he would have failed it, so he resigned from the station so he wouldn't get fired. Then he moved to his hometown of Fresno up north and worked at a classic rock station. In 1988, there was a new program director at 91X named Trip Reed who called Brian and asked him to come back to the station, but under a couple of stipulations. For one thing, he had to submit to 3 drug tests every week, and also he had to visit a psychiatrist regularly to help him stay off drugs, and the station would foot the bill for him. In September 1988, when doing a remote broadcast at an Amnesty International concert in London, he had partaken in cocaine, returned to San Diego, and tested positive, and was fired. Jones threatened to sue, saying that he wouldn't be dumb enough to do drugs, knowing that he'd be tested 3 times a week. A year later, when he was interviewed by the Los Angeles Times, Brian Jones admitted that yes, he was indeed that dumb, and he felt he really did deserve to be fired. After losing his 91X job, he went back to Fresno again and continued doing drugs for a while because, well, he claimed he enjoyed doing that more than actually working at 91X due to the pressure he felt at the station. So after spending some time up there in Fresno doing drugs, playing golf, and working in classic rock radio, Brian Jones decided he was going to clean himself up, stop doing drugs, and return to San Diego, where he got a job at Z90, another station located in Tijuana. By all accounts, he was a model employee at the radio station, and he helped bring the station's morning ratings up. In later years, he worked for MP3.com, SpinRecords.com, and a couple of other digital music companies. Over the years, he returned to Fresno in hopes of becoming mayor, but alas, it never happened, nor will it ever, because he died from a heart attack on November 14th, 2006. He was only 49 years old. As for Dean Opperman, well, unfortunately, I don't have quite that level of detail about what he's been up to in the years since, but I can tell you this much. After he went to Fresno, he helped relaunch radio station KKDJ, where he was a popular morning host before his days in San Diego. Opperman's LinkedIn profile lists a plethora of radio stations where he'd worked over a 50-year period, and he's also done some blogging for the Huffington Post in recent years. Unfortunately, I was unable to ascertain what Dean Opperman is up to nowadays here in 2025, for those of you listening in the future, or maybe he's retired, but let's just say he was quite a busy guy for decades, and for all I know, still might be. And looking at his resume makes me glad that I chose to end my radio career after only a couple of years. At this point, I would like to give the record my rating, but before then, I'm going to wax philosophical on Sean's record collecting thoughts. Now, for this episode, I want to talk about a topic I originally planned for the previous episode, but then Brian Wilson died, and I decided to change the subject to focus on him, but in a way that was kind of serendipitous in that the topic that I had wanted to talk about was promo records, which are usually given to radio stations. And what better time to talk about promo records than when the focus of the episode is about a record done by a radio station. I don't really have a heck of a lot of experience with promo records. You might come across promo copies in used record stores or record shows. Promos, as you may or may not know, are essentially copies of recordings sent to radio stations from the record labels specifically for airplay, basically to promote the recording itself. I imagine that promo copies might also be sent out to, say, journalists to give them something to write about, especially if they work for trade magazines. Sometimes the promo copy that you get is virtually identical to the commercial version. Sometimes it's vastly different. There are some promotional records in my collection, and as I went through my inventory, I saw they're actually more than I realized. But as I go through these records, I realized promo records tell a story. Or at least maybe if they don't tell you the story, you can make your own story from it by drawing conclusions. For example, one of the most recent promo records that I added to my collection was the double-sided Do the Donkey Kong by Buckner and Garcia. The promo copy has the same song on both sides. That was the follow-up single to their hit Pac-Man Fever. I found this at Rattleback Records in Chicago not long ago, and it looks like it was never, ever touched, and to be quite honest, I doubt it ever really was. Buckner and Garcia recorded Pac-Man Fever to cash in on the Pac-Man craze, and it worked. It sold a lot. And so the folks at Columbia Records asked them to do an entire album full of video game themed songs, and Do the Donkey Kong was one of them. Well, Donkey Kong didn't have quite the mania that Pac-Man did at the time, even though there are still Donkey Kong related games. All the Mario games, that comes from Donkey Kong. But that single didn't really go very far, so you can kind of understand why it was hardly played. And really, the record itself is virtually identical to any other record. The only thing different is that the words demonstration, not for sale, appear on the label above the catalog number, but it's very blink and you'll miss it. That phrase also appears on one side of the picture sleeve, but alas, my copy did not come with the picture sleeve. There's another promo copy that's in our collection, and technically it's Lisa's. Let's just say it's in our post-wedding combined collection. It's a promo copy of Holland by the Beach Boys. Now, there's nothing on the album cover that indicates it's any different from the commercial version on Reprise Records, but the record label sure is noticeably different. The labels on the Beach Boys singles and albums between 1970 and 1978 that were issued with Brother Records labels, this promo copy of Holland that Lisa found essentially has a black and white version of the label with the phrase promotion, not for sale, written above the artist in the title. And above the promotion verbiage, it shows the total playing time of the album side, which I don't believe the commercial version does. That the playing time was included tells me that perhaps AOR stations were being targeted, which makes sense. Holland is a very AOR-friendly album, especially with the California Saga suite, but that's not my point. But whatever the case, that copy of Holland plays back beautifully. It sounds fantastic. There isn't any surface noise on it whatsoever. And sometime not too long ago, I also acquired a promo copy of the Beach Boys' Sail on Sailor, backed with Only With You. Both those songs are from the Holland album, and in fact, Sail on Sailor was specifically recorded to be the album's first single. Interestingly, that promo copy of the single is mono on both sides. It's most likely a fold down and not a proper separate mono mix. Unfortunately, though, it sounds awful. I mean, the record itself plays back perfectly fine, at least the A-side does, but the sound quality in general, it's very bland. There are no dynamics, there's no high, there's no medium, it's mostly low. Chances are that was a result of the fold down happening. But even more interesting, Sail on Sailor plays through perfectly. There's not a single hint of surface noise, no skips, no pops, no crackles, no nothing. But the B-side, Only With You, sounds like it has a lot of wear and tear in it. It's very crackly. It's not just static because there's legitimate nicks and scuffs on it. which made me wonder, did the station that I'm assuming had this record before actually play Only With You on the air? Those of you who are not Beach Boys fans, Only With You is a very mellow song. It's a ballad. So that made me think maybe a light rock station had this and played it a lot and never gave Sail on Sailor, the obvious hit side of the single, much of a chance. But interestingly, there was no indication as to what the A side was and what the B side was. And I know from other records that there are some labels that would make it clear that number one, the record was a promotional copy, and number two, which side was meant to be the one promoted. Because I am the person I am, I can tell you about Parlophone Records, the Beatles label in England. I don't have any Parlophone promotional singles, but I can tell you that they had white labels, and the A side had a giant red letter A, and no side indicator on the B side. Now, I don't know who would have received the promo copies in England, because generally records were not played on BBC radio due to musicians' union rules. The logic was, if you're playing the records on the radio for free, then why would somebody want to buy them if they can just hear them for free? That's why so many artists have archives of recordings made specifically for the BBC. Instead of getting the commercial versions, they'd record and perform new versions specifically to air on the BBC, so they weren't the same versions that were on the records. And on the American side of the Atlantic, Beatles promo singles in the Capitol label looked vastly different from the commercial releases. Whereas commercial Capitol singles had a yellow and orange swirl design on the label, the promo versions were just plain yellow. On the left side in large, bold, all capital letters was the phrase promotion record, and on the right side in the same font were the words not for sale. So it was very clear that the record was not the same one you'd find at, say, your local department store. Perhaps the most famous of the Beatles promo singles is Penny Lane. The recording, at least on the Capitol version of the promotional single, was slightly different. Most diehard Beatles fans are aware of the extra piccolo trumpet riff at the very end that was inexplicably mixed out of the commercial version. In 2017, the 50th anniversary box set of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band was released, and one of the many extra tracks on it was the mono US promo single version of Penny Lane. Problem with that is they were not able to find the master tape that contained that mix, so they actually mastered it from a record. And Penny Lane, as were most Beatles songs, was a huge hit. It went to number one, so you better believe that radio stations played the hell out of that record. And it shows on that box set. You can tell that it was mastered from a very used copy of the single. Personally, I thought they should have just gone back to the multi-tracks and made a new mix so that we could still hear that extra trumpet. But whatever, let me get back on topic here. If you happen upon a promo copy, why would you want to buy it? Well, obviously, promos are not as common as their commercial equivalents, so they're generally a bit more collectible. Also, with a lot of promo records, you'll find that at least part of it plays back flawlessly, as I found with a couple of records in my collection. Perfect example, I found a promo copy of the Hollies' 1968 single, Jennifer Eccles, and Try It, when I was record shopping, I believe, also at Rattleback Records in Chicago. I like both songs. Jennifer Eccles is kind of dippy, but I love Try It. It's very psychedelic. I finally listened to it, and it played back perfectly on both sides. Again, I don't think this one was touched. And I listened to Try It, and Try It was a different version from what I was accustomed to. I'm going to assume that at least one person listening knows the song Try It by the Hollies and how it has these weird sound effects all throughout the record. Well, this version doesn't have the sound effects. It has the backwards cymbals, but this particular mix was really trippy. The verses were very quiet in the mix and heavily reverbed, and the choruses were not reverbed and they were right up front, but at the very end, it sounded as if they were being sucked out of the Hollies' throats. I thought maybe it was some kind of reverse echo effect or a reverse reverb, so I played the record backwards, well, because my turntable has a reverse function, but no, there wasn't any audible reverb to it, so I don't know, it just sounded really trippy.
Beautiful, see all the colors of a rainbow.
It was fascinating, and I'm going to be playing the heck out of that thing too. I'm going to digitize that thing because I could not find that particular mix of the song anywhere, not YouTube, not anywhere else, even on the Hollies Epic Anthology collection, which is a singles compilation. They use the other mix that I'm familiar with. I thought maybe this was unique to the promo mix, but looking on Discogs, it doesn't appear that's the case because somebody who has the standard commercial version of the single reported hearing the same weird alternate mix that I heard. Now, just a couple of weeks ago, I was cleaning a box of singles that I have, and some of the singles were records that I kind of took from my dad's singles collection shortly after he died. And he had a small handful of Fireballs singles. The Fireballs were basically an instrumental group from New Mexico who existed in the late 50s and early 60s. And they're kind of like the Ventures. They have that kind of twangy guitar, mostly instrumental, a little tiny bit surf-ish in a way. And it's the same band that was eventually called Jimmy Gilmer in the Fireballs, and they had that hit called Sugar Shack. My dad's Fireballs records predate Sugar Shack. There is a single that has a instrumental called Rick-a-Tick on the A side and a mostly instrumental track called Yacky Doo on the B side. Yeah, these are bizarre titles. But these 3 Fireballs singles were on the Top Rank International label, which was red, except for Rick-a-Tick and Yacky Doo, that was a white label. As I was entering them on Discogs, I learned that the copy of Rick-a-Tick and Yacky Doo was a promo. My dad would have gotten this in the early 60s, and I have no idea how he would have gotten a hold of a promo copy. He didn't work for a radio station ever, so there's like a mystery there, and unfortunately, because he's gone, I can't ask him if he remembers. Part of me thought that maybe he picked it up at a naval base or something, but no, he was already out of the Navy by the time this song was out. So there's a big mystery there, unless maybe a radio station somewhere was selling off some of its inventory. I don't know. He definitely would have bought this in the 60s because I remember my dad would basically keep up with contemporary music. I was born in the 70s, and I remember in the 70s, my dad was listening to Glenn Campbell's most recent records. He was listening to some Eagles and Love's Theme by Love Unlimited Orchestra, God Help Me, Feelings by Morris Albert. And then when the 80s happened, he was listening to, say, Juice Newton, Alabama. And when the 90s happened, he was listening to modern country like Lori Morgan and Toby Keith and Keith Whitley and those kind of, and Vince Gill, I think. Basically, when those years changed, I never heard him play anything from prior years. I never heard him play any of his 50s or 60s records, ever. And the thing is, now, my dad, he was a great dad, but his musical tastes embarrassed the hell out of me. But I gotta say, listening to this Rick-a-Tick and Yacky Doo single, I'm like, oh my God, this is actually pretty cool. And yeah, it seems that in the 50s and 60s, my dad was into that twangy guitar stuff. He had a couple of Chet Atkins records. He had some Ventures stuff. He had some Fireballs records. He had a couple of Dwayne Eddy singles. So it kind of gives me a look into what he was listening to during his youth. Now, one record I have to talk about that's not really a promo record, but I know was owned by a radio station. My copy of If I Could Only Remember My Name, David Crosby's debut album. I think it was 2019 when I went to Laurie's Planet of Sound in Chicago, specifically looking for that album, and they happened to have 2 copies in stock. One that was in really good shape, and another that had radio station markings all over it, like rubber stamps, labels with writing on it, masking tape with writing on it. The difference between the two, other than the condition, was the price. I decided to opt for the radio station copy for 2 reasons. Number 1, it was much cheaper. And number 2, having worked in radio before, I kind of felt, I guess a little kinship with that. It turns out that the vinyl itself was in absolute pristine condition. It probably was never ever played. And when I cataloged it on Discogs.com, I found out that it was a 1975 pressing. Why would a radio station add that to their collection in 1975 instead of 4 years earlier when it came out? I looked up the radio station on the web, and it looked like the Crosby album didn't even fit the format. And then I remembered something. During my days at the Cat 105.5 outside of Joliet, Illinois, modern rock station, during one of our meetings, our music director was talking about how they have things in their collection that aren't really meant to be played. She said, for example, you'll see that we have a couple of Beatles albums here, but the thing is, we're not going to play it unless perhaps George Harrison dies or something. And sure enough, he was the next to go. But thinking about that made me think that perhaps the reason that the station owned this David Crosby album was to have something to play to pay tribute to him in the event of his death. And in 1975, he was probably very close to death, given how he did not take care of himself, how much he was into drugs at the time. It's amazing that he actually lived to be in his 80s. But nonetheless, I cherish that copy of If I Could Only Remember My Name, because number one, it has radio station markings all over it, and as a friend of mine once said, provenance. And number two, and more importantly, it is a fantastic album from start to finish, and I highly recommend it in any format, vinyl, CD, cylinder, whatever you can find it on, get a copy. It's wonderful. But I guess one thing that I should say about promo records is that they usually go for reasonable prices. They're not terribly expensive for the most part. But that makes me think of one very unfortunate event that happened. I think it was in 2000 when Lisa and I were at Beatle Fest in the marketplace. One of the vendors had a promotional copy of Pacific Ocean Blue, Dennis Wilson's first and only album he released during his lifetime. I had been looking for Pacific Ocean Blue for a while. The promotional copy the vendor had a $25 price tag on it. I felt that was too much. 25 years later, I still do not have a vinyl copy of Pacific Ocean Blue. Am I kicking myself every day? Yes, I am. I mean, yeah, I can get the 2008 reissue on vinyl. That's pretty easy to find, but no, I want the original version on vinyl. For some reason, I just can't find it anywhere. Last summer, when Lisa and I were in Ocean Beach, San Diego, during the farmer's market, there was a vendor that had a lot of records, and she had a copy of Pacific Ocean Blue. The price tag, $60. I asked Lisa, should I just buy this so I can finally have it and be done with it? She said, well, think about it for a while and decide. I looked closer at that copy of Pacific Ocean Blue and was very willing to part with $60 until I saw that it was in absolutely horrible condition. No way was I parting with $60 for Pacific Ocean Blue that is not in decent condition. Heck, the most I ever paid for a single record was $60 for a copy of Abbey Road on the Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab label, and that was used. Sure as heck wasn't going to pay $60 for Pacific Ocean Blue, no way. I did actually end up buying a record or two from that vendor, just not Pacific Ocean Blue. So that's my tragic story of a promotional album that I should have bought, but didn't. Should you buy a promotional copy of a record? Well, it's up to you. Again, they're usually not terribly expensive, and they're nice to have. They're pretty cool alternate versions that you can have in your collection that'll stick out. And a lot of times they'll even sound better than the commercial versions. Sometimes you might have completely different versions of the recording altogether. But whatever the case, promotional records, or CDs for that matter, are still pretty cool to have. As those of you who've been listening to this podcast for a while know, I do like to rate these records, and for those of you who are new to this podcast, I'll explain how I rate them. There are 5 factors I rate a record on, pardon the dangling preposition, and each of those factors gets a score of anywhere between 1 and 5 inclusive, and those factors are local interest or usefulness. Sometimes I do both and average them together based on what the record is. I also take into account historical interest, meaning, is this record a interesting sign of its time? And I rate records also on their uniqueness, weirdness, and enjoyability. Now, obviously, Will They Know It's Summertime is very San Diego-centric. Most of the performers are pretty much only known in the San Diego area, maybe Los Angeles. Local interest, absolutely 5 out of 5. Historical interest, well, the album is very of its time. You don't need to be told it's from 1985. You just need to listen to just about any 2 seconds of the record to know that. But even more importantly, given the reason that Will They Know It's Summertime exists in the first place, the album is absolutely of historical interest. I know I've used the phrase already in this episode, but people of a certain age remember very well the famine in Ethiopia and the many efforts to raise money to fight that famine. I cannot give a rating any less than 5 for historical interest. Now, uniqueness, even though the album is not really of much use to anybody who didn't spend significant time in San Diego in the 80s, I don't think it's particularly unique, really. First of all, it was very common for radio stations, especially in larger markets, to release compilation albums. You'll probably find 1 or 2 in just about any used record store, really. Even some smaller stations did that. This isn't even the only compilation that 91X released, although this one was made for charity. All of the profits went to charity, and all involved in the album were not paid for their time and work. But it's not the only charity album, and it's not the only album recorded to raise money for African famine relief. I'm giving the uniqueness rating of this album 2, and there are only 2 reasons that I'm rating it that high. Number 1, you'll probably only find the album in the wild if you're in the San Diego metro area. And number 2, I checked Discogs, eBay, Etsy, and Amazon and didn't find any for sale. In fact, there are a handful of people on Discogs who have the album on their want lists. And I did notice, by the way, the lowest the album ever sold for on Discogs was under $15, and the highest was just under $16. So, at a few cents under $6, I think I got a pretty good bargain. But how about weirdness? The reason I was attracted to the album in the first place was that it was so bizarre looking and thinking it was essentially We Are the World sideways. The album layout, as I said, was modeled after We Are the World, and the title song, of course, is basically Do They Know It's Christmas, but with words related to Christmas taken out and replaced with summer-themed lyrics. At first thought, you'd think that this is a misguided effort, possibly bordering on the tacky side, so that adds to the weirdness factor, but really, it was a sincere effort on the part of 91X and Project Concern International. But I don't think I can give the weirdness rating anything higher than a 2. But really, no matter the overall purpose, what's the main thing you have to do if you want to sell a record? You got to make it enjoyable, so let's talk about enjoyability. If you like Do They Know It's Christmas, you'll likely find the song Will They Know It's Summertime in and of itself pointless. If you like the sound of mid-80s music, you'll enjoy the album overall, but to me, that's the problem. Most of the songs, they could have been done by anybody in the mid-80s. It's like a mid-80s music checklist. Is there a synth? Check. Reverb snare drum? Check, etc., etc. Basically, listening to this record reminded me why around 1986 I started listening to music from the 60s, because modern music all started to sound the same to me, just lifeless, sterile, generic. For me, the saving grace on the album is the Mojo Nixon track Death Row Blues. It's not as great as, say, Elvis Is Everywhere, but it's still a really fun song. It's really cool. And among the rest of the album, it's a change of pace that actually does sound pretty organic. But again, if you like the sound of 1985, you'd probably like this album, so I will give the enjoyability rating a wishy-washy grade of 3. So totaling all that up, 5 for both local interest and historical interest, 2 for both uniqueness and weirdness, 3 for enjoyability, that all adds up to a composite score of 17 for Will They Know It's Summertime. There are 3 other records covered in this podcast that got a rating of 17, and that's Reach by Richard Simmons, Name That Trivia, and Everything You Need to Know to Operate a CB Radio. And the order I read those titles off is the order in which I sub-ranked them. So now I have to sub-rank Will They Know It's Summertime. I just feel that if I had those 4 records to pick from, the Sand Aid album is the one I'm least likely to grab, so that'll go in the bottom of those 4. And my friends, that was everything I could tell you about Will They Know It's Summertime. And by the way, I apologize if there was ever a time in which I called it Will They Know It's Christmas or something else, because I might have gotten confused. I think you can understand. But do you have any thoughts on this record or anything else relevant to this podcast in general? Well, before I tell you about next month's episode, I'm going to tell you where you can send those thoughts, and I will also give credit where credit is due. My email address is myweirdrecords@fab4it.com. Fab4it is spelled F-A-B, the number 4-I-T. The website for My Weird Record Collection, where you'll find the show notes, that has a similar address on the web, myweirdrecords.fab4it.com. I'm on various social networks, including Blue Sky, Twitter, Instagram, and you'll find my handle, My Weird Records. You can look for this podcast on Facebook. You can just do a search for My Weird Record Collection or go directly to facebook.com/MyWeirdRecords. You can also access the podcast on YouTube, where you'll find not only episodes of this podcast, which include a few visual aids as well, but also whenever possible, you'll find audio of the records that I discuss, and sometimes I'll throw up a bonus video that may be related to my weird collection or maybe my not so weird collection. Just search for My Weird Record Collection on YouTube or go straight to youtube.com/@My Weird Record Collection. Sounds and music, by the way, that are used in this podcast remain the property of their respective copyright holders and are used for commentary and review. Infringement is not intended. Special thanks to Tim Christ, also known as Shoebox, also known as Worm Quartet, for letting me use his record, the Pac-Man EP, as the basis for the logo for this podcast. Tim and his Place Adjective Here music can be found on his website at worm-quartet.web.app. Special thanks and a major heartfelt apology goes out to my friend Kevin Zerby for designing the logo artwork for this podcast. Yes, that's right, Kevin Zerby, whose name I've been mispronouncing for years before I even started this podcast. But Kevin Zerby, not Zerb, and his music and his podcasts, including his newest podcast called Mono, are available on the web at zerbinator.com. Also, a big thanks to Ferg, a lifelong East Coaster who helped me out with the research for this San Diego record. Next month, I dare you to listen to this podcast because doing so will make you great. Find out why on August 15th. Until then, this is Sean reminding you, support your local record store.
This is Lawrence Welk saying, thank you, San Diego, for your generous help.
Nearly 50 singers precipitate. Oh my. Ugh. Hate to think of that.